Week 18 is upon us, and with, frankly, a tough week of football that we've been all watching and kind of working through, we just got to move forward as best we can, talk about this slate that is going to be absolutely unequivocal chaos this weekend. That is what Week 18 is. Let's waste no time and get right into it. And actually, I should waste a second here to say, apologies for not doing a stream yesterday, but obviously with the Damar Hamlin stuff, just didn't feel right to talk about fantasy football things, certainly to talk about any best ball related things. So I just wanted to skip the day. Let us sit on that one. And as somebody who has a family with a torrid history of heart issues, shout out to Damar Hamlin. It's honestly one of the more brutal things I've had to watch on a screen. Put the fear of God into me a little bit, shook me a little bit to the point that I've been working out a little extra hard the last 2 days. But take care of your hearts, guys, and certainly, prayers out for Damar and all the Bills fans and Bills players who have to play through that this week. With that said, let's try to get onto the course of business here. 2 slates on DraftKings this week. Week 18, again, it's going to be an absolute fucking dumpster fire. There's no better way to say that, no more honest way to say that than this one. As you guys might have seen today, ESPN put out a notification saying that Taylor Heineke was going to be starting for the Commanders. Instead, it ends up being Sam Howell. There's going to be a lot of that throughout this week. Justin Fields ruled out. Nathan Peterman going to be starting for the Bears. So even to do a first look is inherently kind of a fool's errand, but I will do the best I can to give you guys some insight, some looks into everything, and also to talk about some of the playoff implications and all of that are going to give teams more motivation to play this week than they might have otherwise. Shout out to Multiple Connoisseur. Shout out to all the chat as well. Appreciate you guys hanging out with me here. Of course, weird time to talk football, but we're going to do the best we can here. And I always appreciate the chat tuning in. And of course, hitting the like button it means a lot to me. Let's talk about the QBs, though. So Buffalo, one of the weird parts of what happened on Monday and what happens to be a weird part moving forward, the Bills are playing for a bye. 2 wins would have gotten them a bye ahead of the Chiefs. Didn't matter if the Chiefs won out. The Bills were still in play for that one. So the expectation here is that they're going to go full bore. If the game were to be ruled a no contest before Sunday, the Bills-Bengals game from Monday night, that would mean theoretically the Bills would have nothing to play for, or at least a lot less to play for besides some seeding. So there is a chance that this motivation could change for them throughout the week. Right now, though, the assumption is that Josh Allen will be in play this week. He's not been quite as good game to game overall the last few weeks, over the last month. You could certainly say not quite had the same ceiling. Obviously, this one game against Miami being the outlier. Going against the Patriots, though, another competent defense, top 2 in the league in terms of VPA, estimated points added, one of the advanced analytics stats that I would recommend all you guys start to work into your repertoires. It does seem like it'd be hard to expect a Josh Allen ceiling day here. Certainly, it's tough to expect a ceiling day for this entire offense overall. Jalen Hurts expected to go this week. The Eagles need this one desperately because we saw who Gardner Minshew really was against the Saints after he kind of false flagged us against that game, or in that game rather, against the Cowboys. Jalen Hurts in this spot going against the Giants defense that overall defensively not that good. It's given up good production to teams that are much worse than Jalen Hurts certainly is. I'm not worried about the sprained shoulder. He was able to play through it a couple weeks ago, a couple weeks of rest. You have to assume he'll be able to go out there. More of a precautionary rest thing for him these last few weeks. But the Eagles need this win to clinch the bye. It's also going on the same time as the other teams playing for the bye. So this is a 4:25 game. Kicks off the same time as the Cowboys. Kicks off the same time as the Niners. So the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Niners, 3 teams that should be playing with their full motivation this week, which is something important to file away. And Jalen Hurts certainly as good of a play as anybody. High price tag, though, does make him tough for DFS. Certainly we know the ceiling Jalen Hurts has game to game, slate to slate, all of that. And today I will be talking about the Sunday slate first, then hit on Saturday slate. So hang in tight if you're looking just for some little 2-game advantage, 2-game EV on that Saturday slate, where it's going to be a lot of Chiefs played. I'll get to that one after we dig into the Sunday stuff. Joe Burrow, certainly a nice spot on paper here. As I've talked about a few times, Baltimore, one of the worst teams defending the deep pass in the league. We saw that pop up a little bit on Sunday night for Pittsburgh. Certainly Joe Burrow, one of the best passers overall, throwing the deep ball this year. Certainly got the best weapons as well in the league, or at least right there with anybody else out there. Burrow, an interesting play to me at this price tag, a guy who certainly, a short week of game prep for him, but also one where obviously didn't play all of Monday night. So he's a little bit fresher than he probably would be in a normal situation. It's sort of hard to, and I don't want to sort of dig into the weirdness of this situation, but maybe hard for us to project how a guy will handle seeing what those guys saw on Monday night. I'm not going to try to talk about that and extrapolate about that, but something for you to consider when you are thinking about these players. That is something that is a little bit of a weird one. Multiple Connoisseur asking a similar question. Any word and if they're going to try and play Bills-Bengals again? This is not official word by any stretch, but our guys, Football Outsiders, are pretty well connected. Their read was that it's probably going to be a no contest, or is what they'll call the game as a no contest. I saw ESPN's been kind of pushing the agenda of trying to play this game after Week 18, and that's the other possibility, is that they could play the NFC wildcard games push back the AFC wildcard games by 1 week and then play Bills, Bengals, and a bunch of NFC wildcard games. The question, though, is like, are the Bills going to care enough to do that? I don't know. Are the Bengals going to care enough to do that? They could also theoretically win the bye. It wouldn't matter for them if the Chiefs win on Saturday. So that's something for the Bengals where they might lose their dog in the fight if the Chiefs do win on Saturday. For the Bills, though, it's sort of tough because theoretically they could be playing for the bye, but these are NFL teams that have dealt with COVID and all those weird reschedulings the last few years. So for them, they might have a little more of a tolerance to things that are inherently kind of unfair this year. So that's something to keep in mind here, but I would watch the Chiefs game closely to determine how the Bengals will be motivated or not motivated on Sunday. And obviously, if there's news too throughout the course of the week, certainly that'll affect this as well, where if the game is for sure locked in, then the Bengals should be full go. The Bills should be full go. But if the game is not locked in, or if it's called a no contest, then both teams should probably not be playing to their full efforts. Schefter just tweeted, talked to exec Jeff Miller, and talks are ongoing. A decision is going to have to be made in the coming days. That's what our guys were saying too. But their read was really that it was going to be a no contest. Like, I think if I had to guess, and this is me talking out my ass, so apologies for our Football Outsiders guys. I'm not trying to put this on them as reporting it, but I would guess like 66-33 that it's a no contest and that 33% chance that they would play it through. But the Bills seem game to go through the wild card ever they're going to have to go through it, and they're going through enough anyway. It's definitely possible the game just doesn't get played. Lamar Jackson, can't imagine him playing this week. Certainly didn't play the last few weeks, so I would mostly just avoid him for the most part. Baltimore's motivation, I think there's some minor seeding things they could try to adhere to, but for the most part, Lamar shouldn't have the motivation to get back out there. Justin Herbert, the Chargers, one of those surprising teams that have been playing pretty heavily for seeding to try to avoid certain matchups. So you would expect Justin Herbert to be full go here. He's going against a Denver team that is actually defensively still fairly sound. We obviously saw the 50-point day a couple weeks ago against the Rams. That's something I don't expect from Denver over and over again. Obviously, the Chiefs certainly put up their points as well, but it wasn't as bad of an outlier effort against a much better team. So I think Justin Herbert's in play, but I certainly wouldn't treat him as like, you got to go his way. Oh, the Chargers are going full effort. Herbert, I think, comes with a lot of risk against a Denver team that has really stopped things that Justin Herbert in particular does well in terms of getting that ball downfield and actually hitting things accurately. Tua expected not to play. It is probably going to be Teddy Bridgewater, who's got a broken finger, or Skylar Thompson. That is not a great one to feel either way here. They're going against the Jets, as we talked about all season long. The Jets shut down the deep ball as well as anybody. Sauce Gardner, you could individually kind of pin that to him as being part of that reason, but it is really schematically just what they do overall. Negative 0.7 EPA on the year against deep balls. That's a really strong mark for a team that should theoretically give up some production at some point. Even against Geno, they didn't really give up a lot downfield. It kind of kept most of his action underneath for the most part throughout that game. So I think in this spot, to me, I would not want to go to either of the Miami quarterbacks. You can play Tyreek as sort of a dart throw. You can play Jalen Waddle as sort of a dart throw. But this Jets defense overall is really sound across the board, and I really don't want to test that matchup too much more. After, again, Geno couldn't get there meaningfully last week. They won the game, couldn't get there meaningfully. That's something I would expect again for this spot for Miami. Dak Prescott, hard to expect him to be going full bore unless you think Sam Howell's going to be an absolute monster for Washington. I think Sam Howell's actually a pretty good prospect, a little bit short, but does really gun that ball downfield in the way that we love to see here on a show called Splash Play. But that said, Dak, I think the defense will do a lot of the work here. I don't expect this to be a game where Dak is going to be summoned fully into duty. They are full motivation, so that is something that certainly gives you a little more ceiling for Dak. Nice price tag on him, but really hard for me to expect them to want to push that here. You could all see the injury at him. He hyperextended his knee on that Thursday win over the Titans. That's not great for Dak either. I would have some real concerns here, and that's probably the theme of the week here. I have some concerns about pretty much every quarterback because that's what week 18 sort of is. Iwi saying they should cancel the game or declare a tie. I think those are the two primary options that I was saying, where that's 66% probability, but 33% chance is that, like, if we're talking about it being fair, the Chiefs should not get the bye. And the Chiefs have kind of screwed the Bills the last few years with NFL rules kind of going in their favor. The overtime stuff certainly been a thing that's reared its ugly head against the Bills. I think that's something that I would be mindful of if I were the Bills here. But that said, they're going through so much as a team. It's hard for them to politic that much for what's fair. But that said, if they win their last two games, assuming they replay that game and then also have this win against New England, that's certainly a spot where they could win the bye, or they would win the bye. So it's sort of tough to unpack there. I don't know how to read these things. I only know how to read Vegas lines and projections and sort of what players are going to do. I don't know what teams are going to do overall. So that's something that, it's hard to kind of extrapolate on too much, but definitely something to be mindful of here as we watch the news over the next few days. Kirk Cousins going against Chicago. I mean, this is a spot. I don't know what Minnesota's really playing for. I believe, let me pull up the playoff situations. Playoff scenarios are going to be very important here. I believe they could still get a bye. I'm not actually sure about that one. There was a CBS article that was pretty good. Let me screen share this one. We'll read through it together to make sure that we're all on the same page, because I think, honestly, the motivations are the most important thing to hit on here. And I tried to wrap my head around it as best as possible, but it's a lot like doing homework where some of the stuff just doesn't quite stick in your head as well as it should. Hopefully no autoplay video comes up. All right, so the Vikings are officially out of the bye. So the Vikings are playing for nothing besides Justin Jefferson's theoretical record, shot at 2,000 yards, which he did himself no favors with a 1 for 15 day this past week that killed all of us in best ball for the most part, or killed at least half the field in best ball this week. I would say I don't expect the Vikings to be full go. Theoretically, you do want to see them shake off what happened in that Packers game, where that was one of their worst games of the year. This is a team that's been lucky all year. If you look at some of the advanced stats, like the Pythagorean wins and all that stuff, the Vikings should not be as good of a team as they are. DVOA, I know Football Outsiders' proprietary stat, same thing as well. That team is not quite as good as they have been in terms of their win represented so far this year. So I think in this spot, I would expect the Vikings to be a full go, at least for a half. You want to see that offense work out some kinks. There's a possibility of Jefferson trying to get a 250-yard day in the hopes of breaking the record or breaking the 2,000-yard milestone he wanted to hit. But can you fully feel confident in that one? I certainly wouldn't want to spend my money on that one, is how I feel about it. But we'll talk about that more as we go. All right, back to the DraftKings screen here. Chiefs should get the bye if they get it because of a tie or a forfeit. Prayers for Hamlin, but it is what it is. It's a profession we have chosen. It's a little bit of a callous way to look at it, but they're going to get the bye if there's a tie or forfeit. That's just how that works. It's just, is that the fair thing? Is that the thing the Bills want to do? I think a lot of it's going to come down to the Bills' motivations, because clearly the NFL wanted those guys to play after a 5-minute break on Monday. I would say the NFL probably would like to see that game played, but logistically, with the networks, with the stadiums, with all that stuff, there's a lot of parts to move around to make that game happen. So if the Bills aren't going to put up a fight, I think the game doesn't happen. If the Bills do put up a fight because they want to get the bye, then that is where, you could see things get a little bit weird. Other QBs to look at here. Tom Brady against Atlanta, another very soft spot. The Bucs, though, not really playing for anything here, not playing much for, I guess, theoretically for seeding, but that doesn't really matter that much for the Bucs, a team that's underperformed all year and probably just happy to make the playoffs at this point, when, quite frankly, I thought there was a chance they were going to blow the South last week against the Panthers. Tom Brady has his outlier day, though. You look at these numbers here. This is the kind of thing he should have done a lot of matchups throughout the year. So a shout out to our guy, Pat Kerrane, of course, who was driven to success this week by Tom Brady. I don't see it happening again here. It is a very soft matchup. Brady can get whatever he wants against Atlanta. Any team can get whatever they want against Atlanta. That said, if you're the Bucs, do you want to keep Tom Brady in the pocket, potentially taking hits against an Atlanta team in a game that doesn't really matter? I think that's something that I would certainly have some avoidance towards. I also think, too, this recent game, people might think that Brady's getting right heading into the playoffs. People may want to play him. That's something that I would want to avoid for the most part. So Brady, a guy that I would think kind of out of play this week, though. I guess if you hear they're going to start and play 4 quarters, then that would give you a little more motivation, a little more onus to go there. Geno Smith, actively playing for a playoff spot. If the Seahawks win, they are in. So that is an important one. They could also get in with a Packers loss or tie, but that would take their destiny out of their own hands. So that is something where the Seahawks should be full go. The Seahawks also, if they win, could affect the motivations for Detroit this week. Detroit can only make the playoffs if the Seahawks lose, or I think lose or tie. So that's something where it could affect the Sunday night game a little bit. But the expectation here is that Geno's going to be full go. We know he's had some ceiling days, obviously not recently. Hasn't had a 20-point game in the last 3 weeks. That's certainly not the best one. Still a ton of dropbacks, though. 44 attempts against San Francisco, 40 against Kansas City. Can the Rams put up enough of a fight? That's the question you kind of have to ask here. So maybe it's worth having a bring back from the Rams if you're going to play Geno. But Geno, I would expect, will be full go this week. The Rams, pretty bad on the year defending wide receiver 1s, wide receiver 2s, bad against defending the deep ball. I think Geno is actually a pretty live play because you know where the motivation is. You know there's a ceiling. You know you have some targets to stack with them. I think Geno's pretty solid in terms of all the things we would look for. Giants basically playing for seeding at this point. Don't believe they have a shot to win the NFC East. So that's the main thing for them. They can play spoiler a little bit. Obviously, if they beat the Eagles, they are a team that would then be knocking the Eagles out of the bye. Does that matter that much for the Giants? I don't know. My reading of the tea leaves would be with Brian Daboll, that just what we know of him, you got to expect they're going to try pretty hard here. Does that mean running Daniel Jones as much as he normally does? I don't think so. I think you want to keep Daniel Jones in the pocket and keep it safe and see if your defense can help you keep it close. So if anything, maybe Daniel Jones becomes more of a passer and is a little bit more live in stacks than he would be normally, where a lot of his upside's been through the rushing game, a lot of the rushing touchdowns. But Daniel Jones, to me, a guy I would have a little bit of aversion to, a little bit of risk profile to. Brock Purdy, I think, is in a pretty good spot here. They are playing for the bye, a pretty narrow chance of winning that bye, but still a chance to win that bye. The issue here, and this is sort of where DFS wise, like you can't do anything about it. If the Eagles boat race the Giants somehow and they're dominating them in the first half, let's say they're up, 35-10 or something, and they start to pull starters, you could see the Niners and the Cowboys pull their starters at halftime too, because that bye is pretty much locked up for the Eagles then. So that's a little bit of a risk profile for Brock Purdy as well as the Dallas guys. In this spot, though, I think Purdy's certainly going to have to do something against Arizona. Arizona, a team that, as we talked about in the past, does blitz a lot, does get home a lot. So that sort of opens up the underneath routes as well as opens up the downfield routes that Tom Brady didn't take advantage of, but sometimes teams do take advantage of. So Brock Purdy, an interesting play where you could stack him up a bunch of ways. You could play Purdy and McCaffrey. That wouldn't be crazy. You could play Purdy and George Kittle, though. If we have Deebo Samuel back in, George Kittle kind of comes back down to earth a little bit. Same thing for Brandon Ayuk, but I think there's opportunity in this game. Not a bad team total for San Francisco, if I'm remembering correctly as well. Let me just make sure to confirm that. Whatever. I'll look that up in a sec. Either way, though, Brock Purdy in a good spot against an Arizona team that's actively not trying now. The question really, though, is that does that defense shut down Arizona entirely? Do they have to do anything? That can make McCaffrey a better play. That can make Jordan Mason a better play. That's sort of the risk profile of, again, everything in week 18 and why these videos are very hard to do, but I'll try my best to keep going through it. Russell Wilson, oof. Two usable games out of the last three for us. So I guess you could go here. I don't know why Denver's doing anything at this point. Like, I really thought it was going to be 1-2-3 Cancun last week. They instead put up a competitive game against Kansas City, largely driven by the defense. But Russ, 26 for 38. Like, these are good numbers for Russ. Probably some of the better numbers he's had besides the QB rating. So your guess is as good as mine with the Broncos. You could probably see them pull the starters at some point because they are literally playing for nothing. They're not playing for a faint shot at a wild card. This isn't even a 2% probability thing. It's a very unlikely thing. It's an impossible thing that they're going to make the playoffs. So why do you trot out your $200 million QB besides maybe getting an injury exception if he somehow gets hurt? I guess there's some chance Russ could play for that faint hope, but you got to think that Denver's not going to be full go here and not be willing to go there. Purdy will play the entire game. Niners need to win to secure the second seed if the Vikings win. But I think, though, if the Cowboys win, then it doesn't matter for them anyway. So that's sort of the tough math of it all is like, I wouldn't try to be too focused on the binary outcomes of this team winning means this team winning means that, besides the bye stuff. 49ers will know the Vikings result. Vikings play the early game. Niners play the afternoon game. So that's something too where, they'll know the Vikings result. They'll also have the Cowboys going at the same time. It's sort of tough because they can win the bye either way, no matter what the Vikings do. That doesn't really matter that much. But it is something where, certainly motivations can wane throughout the course of a game. I'm doing the best I can right at this point. And hopefully we'll have more of a clear picture at the end of the week, but probably not, honestly, with how this is going to go. Other guys to look at, Baker Mayfield versus Seattle. Probably not for me. We kind of saw what Baker really is this last week, 5 fantasy points against the Chargers. Honestly, it wouldn't shock me if they sat Mayfield here because he does seem like he's going to be a key part of their future for it's at least in terms of being a backup or, a stopgap if Matt Stafford can't go with whatever his neck issues are. So that's a player that certainly could have some ability to get something going. But do you want to trust Baker Mayfield? I certainly don't. That's not something that I want to get to. UE saying Purdy plays and CMC gets light duty. Possibility, but if they're live to win the bye, like they're going to play, I would think full bore, pretty close to full bore. But I don't want to keep getting back into the back and forth of this one because you could sort of talk yourself into either side of the equation. Sam Ehlinger versus Houston. He showed absolutely nothing as a starter. These were all kind of tough matchups, though. Washington's defense is pretty good. New England's defense is good. The Giants' defense is not bad. And obviously that was more in mop-up duty, and he actually was pretty accurate. It's an interesting spot for Ehlinger. I actually don't hate the idea of going here. This game should be competitive. Ehlinger can run a little bit. Some ability for him to get there on the ground. Who do you stack him up with? I would guess one of the tight ends or Pittman would be the most likely options. And they are going to run the ball a good amount with Zach Moss, I think, because both teams are literally running out the clock on the season. And Zach Moss, honestly, might get steamed up a lot because of this matchup against Houston. So Ehlinger could be interesting leverage to go to. I don't hate the idea, but certainly not a player that'd be a priority by any stretch. Justin asking how much is Howell? Howell's got to be like 48, right? 49. So Sam Howell, a guy that I think is really interesting, a guy that's a little bit of a weirdo as we learned in the preseason. I think he should have gotten a shot to start earlier. Honestly, he's a really good deep ball thrower. He's an aggressive deep ball thrower. It's the kind of thing they need in this offense with the guys that they have at receiver. So in this spot, to me, the risk profile with Howell is that he's a deep ball thrower against the Dallas defense that shuts down everything. And obviously, we've seen the Gardner Minshew's have good games against him. We've seen teams have good games against him. Trevor Lawrence, another noteworthy one recently. But it's still a spot for Howell where if he's going to be Gardner Minshew in that last game, like there's upside there. And that means McLaurin could have upside. Maybe Diami Brown, if he's active, can be a guy that gets a deep ball loose as he has shown time to time this year. I don't hate Howell overall. I certainly wouldn't want to play him at volume. I think there's pretty bad projections on Howell across the industry, so that's something to keep in mind as well. But he does fit a lot of the stuff I look for in a backup quarterback coming up. Not a bad college pedigree either, playing at UNC. Like he's played some real guys. It's not like a Zach Wilson and BYU thing where he just beat up on guys who are accountants right now. So Howell, to me, I think is pretty interesting. And that's certainly one that I could talk myself into a few shares of Sam Howell just because it would be a fun few shares to go down in flames for the most part. Let me see who's going to be the chalky plays at QB just to make sure I'm not missing out on anybody. Talked about Hurts, talked about Allen. Oh, apparently Kenny Pickett's going to pick up some ownership here. Let's see what Pickett's doing. It would be helpful if I spelled Pickett correctly. All right, Pickett against Cleveland. So really weird with Pickett that you might see in the thumbnail here. I always put the optimal lineup according to stochastic projections in the thumbnail. So if you wonder where that's coming from, that's what's always in the thumbnail for the most part, as long as the projections are out. They do have pretty good projections for Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth. Obviously, Cleveland, a team that on the year has been better defending the pass than they have been defending the run. So the assumption would be that Najee Harris or Jalen Warren could get out there. Pittsburgh theoretically still playing for a playoff spot. So that's something that I guess could matter here. They win if they get in with a win versus the Browns and a Dolphins loss and a Patriots loss to the Bills. So that's something to keep in mind here. The Pittsburgh should be full go. So I guess you could play Pickett. I would personally prefer to play the running game. We know what, for the most part, Pittsburgh wants to do, which is beat the ball down your throat if they can. And obviously they haven't done that very much with Najee this year. But Pickett's certainly live, and I think he's going to come up a lot with projection systems. So just keep that in mind with Pickett, that he might get steamed up a little bit more just because he looks good. There's motivations there. And the projections for Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth are so high across the industry that it's possible you just see Kenny Pickett kind of come along for the ride with those guys, even though Pickett has not shown much of a ceiling this year, as we've kind of seen week to week. Anybody else who's going to jump out? Desmond Ridder against Tampa Bay. This kind of feels like the guy to me, like one of the guys that goes off in a week 18. Sort of hard to project that meaningfully. Like he didn't take advantage of Arizona as much as I would have liked. Hasn't cracked 10 fantasy points. The rushing upside is there. He's running 4 to 6 times a game, as you can see on the screen here. I do think he's got a pretty good connection with Drake London as well. I don't mind that. Ritter's kind of interesting, I think. Like, I don't hate throwing 5, like to me, like I usually play, 80 lineups a week, 100 lineups a week. I would say donating, most likely donating, but allotting a certain amount of lineups to these guys in the hopes that they are the week 18 guy that bubbles up. So that would be Ridder, that would be Howell, that would be Sam Ehlinger. All those guys I think are kind of live as cheap plays. It's just tough because you really do have to hold your nose for those guys if you're going to get there meaningfully. All these young shit QBs all have noodle arms, except Trevor Lawrence. I don't think Pickett has a noodle arm. I think he just doesn't know how to read an NFL defense right now. I also don't think a Steelers onslaught's the move. Their offense is not good enough, and they could not get there over and over again. But I think Pickett's got an arm. Like, I think Pickett, as long as they don't upset the apple cart too much in the offseason, like I think he can be a good QB, especially with the weapons they have, especially if they do kind of go more Jalen Warren's way than Najee Harris's way and improve that offensive line. But I think Pickett's one of the guys that I would file away as being pretty good. One guy I would file away as not very good would be Nathan Peterman, who we have seen enough of over the course of the years. I really wish we could go back to his entire box score history, but I've seen this song and dance a few too many times. And I guess the one thing that gives me some fear with Nathan Peterman is that David Blau kind of played a competent game for Arizona. Like, it wasn't good by any stretch, but he was decent. Like, him going 24 for 40 against the Niners defense against the Atlanta defense, that's pretty soft, but still is going to take what's there for the most part. He's playing the Niners this week. I don't think I want to go there necessarily, but with Blau looking a little bit, rejuvenated just from being in systems and learning more. Jarrett Stidham's the big one where, like, that guy absolutely sucked when he started before, and he comes in, he's slinging the ball around, a lot of deep passes. I think he had 5 deep attempts in that game. You might want to give a second eye to these guys. I don't know if Peterman actually qualifies as one of those guys, especially with the weapons the Bears have. But we know the Vikings have sucked so bad, and it kind of feels parallel to what Blau did last week. Blau played a bad Atlanta team. Peterman's playing a bad Minnesota team, or a bad defensive Minnesota team. Definitely some chance that Peterman could throw himself into this game. The question is, would you stack him? I feel like a Peterman with Kmet thing. Peterman is a guy I would expect cannot get that ball outside the hash mark. So Kmet would look good to me. Maybe Byron Pringle running some underneath stuff. Maybe they get Chase Claypool involved finally after he's been an absolute absolutely dismal trade that they made for him. So Peterman, I don't want to suggest Nathan Peterman, but I do think overall, like, we should kind of be more open-minded to these guys getting a second shot because they are young. They do sort of learn and improve as they go. And sometimes they can take advantage of a soft defensive matchup, not to tremendous ceiling efforts, but still enough to have outlier days for their pass catchers at least. So the Peterman I would put in that category, even though I actively do not like Nathan Peterman and have actively played defenses against him in the past. Running backs here. So that's kind of crazy. Jordan Mason got priced up a lot, it looks like. Let's pull that up real fast because that's interesting to me. Jordan Mason up to $5,000 here. Certainly some interest in going his way. I think he would be a bit of a fool's play unless you know for a fact that the Niners are not going to be playing starters. Then you could go to Jordan Mason. There's going to be a lot of projections going McCaffrey's way. So Mason still kind of makes sense as a DFS play. It's still like a sub 5% DFS play to get to, not a guy to lock in. Don't galaxy brain yourself out of guys who are actually going to give you real minutes and real carries and real touches at running back for guys who could theoretically give you touches. That's one way to win in week 18. But certainly, a risk profile either way in McCaffrey. I think McCaffrey's honestly been a little bit disappointing lately. Obviously, it's hard to say that when he's put up a 34-point game, but like relative to ownership, relative to the salaries and all of that, you could win a lot without playing McCaffrey at a high price tag. He's 9,300 here. You're taking on a lot of risk of the Niners fully playing this game out. And even if you're playing, just the full slate, you have to then pay attention where if, let's say, the Vikings win and then you hear the Niners are going to pull their starters, you're going to have to late swap a lot of stuff with McCaffrey. So just keep that in mind with your personal bandwidth and all that stuff. But I think McCaffrey's kind of an interesting play just because he probably will end up a little bit lower owned than he should because of the risk profile of the game. He projects incredibly well, but it's just tough to really commit to him fully. Austin Eckler, guy who went off in week 17. I don't see it happening versus Denver, though Denver has given up a lot of production to a kind of similar back in Jerick McKinnon. So you can make the case for Eckler. It would be hard for me to pay the full price tag for these guys who are like 9K this week in general. Like, unless you are sure they're going to play a full run, unless they're Jalen Hurts and he's going to be going his full ass in a game because they have to win the bye. Like, Eckler comes with a risk profile that the Chargers go like, the seating's not worth it. Eckler gets banged up on a play. You wouldn't trot him out there. That said, the ceiling is there. If they play a full game, the ceiling is even more there. Eckler, I could see getting to a little bit, but not a player I would certainly prioritize relative to a week 18 slate. Saquon Barkley, I think he's a dog shit play. He was a dog shit play last week. He is a guy that I played too much of just to try to hedge against Best Ball Mania entries and all of that. I don't like Barkley. I don't like Barkley against an Eagles team that's getting even better week to week against run defenses, as we talked about throughout the entire season. Basically, when they lost Jordan Davis, that run defense went down. When Jordan Davis came back in, that run defense started to come back up. Now they're just a little bit better than league average, but still, people might attack this spot a little bit more than they should. And Barkley's just been dust this year. Like, I know people like him. Like, I know you see a couple outlier games here, but I would look at the downside games. Like, look at the 7 points against Philadelphia. Look at the 7 points against Indianapolis. Look at the 6 points against Detroit. There's enough times where Barkley fails, but because of the volume he gets, people just kind of keep locking him in week after week. I would actively fade Barkley this week. I don't think he's the play that you want to get to. And with the Eagles being full go, being the team that really needs to win, the Giants don't need to win. I think Barkley's one of the first guys you'd want to pull if you're the Giants. It's probably Barkley and Daniel Jones would be the first two guys you take out of the team. Nick Chubb against Pittsburgh. I don't know why he's still getting carries, honestly. Feels like they should trot out Jerome Ford at this point, a guy they like, but I would watch out for Chubb because I don't know why you play Chubb at this point besides to build momentum for next year. And I think it's certainly possible they want to see what they have in the rookie Jerome Ford, who's a guy that they have liked a lot throughout the course of the year, who's actually a monster in the preseason too. Let's watch him real fast. 4K salary for Jerome Ford. And again, you could see, they don't have preseason scores on here. There was one game in the preseason where he had like 10 catches. Like, he's a guy that actually does have some juice, a guy that I like quite a bit, who I took in best ball this year. I think he's one of those guys that I would have thought had more value, but if you're Cleveland, I would not trot out my high dollar running back who you're probably going to have as your lone running back because Kareem Hunt's not likely to be on the team next year. Dalvin Cook at Chicago. It's an easy matchup for him. And Minnesota should be full go because I guess they need to at least see what they can do in terms of seeding. So Dalvin, kind of a good play at 7,300. This might be the part where I'm willing to start to play some running backs here. I think Dalvin at 7,300, probably going to be chalky because this 31st DVP, as we talk about, don't play guys because of DVP, but be aware the field does play guys because of DVP. Dalvin Cook is going to be one of those guys I think gets steamed up because of the matchup against Chicago. And it's also one of those too that advanced analytics support that as well. Chicago really bad in terms of EPA versus the run. Dalvin Cook, also a guy who just can get there via volume. And also it will certainly be helped out by going against a soft team. I think that's something where he does have some upside here. And the one risk profile would be If you're Minnesota, you're probably going to feed Justin Jefferson just to keep him happy and also to get him back on track after a confidence shaking game where you get called out for being a fluke and then you put up one catch for 15 yards. So that's sort of the meta game of it all. Justin Jefferson kind of just leverage against Dalvin Cook relative to matchups. Tony Pollard, I just don't expect Tony Pollard or Zeke to have to get a lot of workload here. Pollard coming off of the thigh issue. I don't think the thigh issue is that serious, but he's at a price tag, man. $7K for Tony Pollard. He doesn't need to show out at this point. Pollard to be a guy I probably would avoid. James Conner, I would think that he doesn't go. Apparently, he's already day-to-day this week. Keontae Ingram could get some carries, but he's getting carries against San Francisco. I would avoid pretty much all the Cardinals against San Francisco, even though they got blown up last week. I just think they're a really good defense. I don't know what the fuck Jarrett Stidham, what he was eating in his Cheerios this week, but I still think that this is a game for me where no Cardinal's going to look that good, and I think the Niners should probably roll. Stevenson against Buffalo, kind of interesting contrarian play. The Patriots are playing for it all here. We did see Damian Harris get back into the mix a little bit. Obviously, the carries for Ramondre come down a little bit. There we go. Justin saying Blau starting. Hopkins already ruled out. I think that tells you where the motivation is. I think, Hopkins getting ruled out last week told you where the motivation was. Blau just kind of played a little bit better than he should against Atlanta because Atlanta's bad. Going against the Niners, though, like even the Niners backups, I think have enough to shut down David Blau and the Cardinals. So to me, the Cardinals are just a no-fly zone for the Cardinals this week. Alvin Kamara, not for me. Not for me at this point. I just don't know. Like the Saints seem to not like him anymore for whatever reason. And granted, he has had his issues off the field and all that. It just seems odd that he hasn't had an outlier day in quite some time. I said the one usable game recently, the 19 DK point day. For the most part, though, I mean, this is it. It's just the one game against Las Vegas that he's been actively good. Everything else has been not that great. Carolina does defend the run fairly well. They're basically league average and everything, besides the fact that they blitz a good amount. I would actually be more inclined to take one of the deep ball pass catchers, take an Olave, take a Rashid Shaheed over Kamara, just because of the fact that Carolina does blitz so much, but doesn't get home very much. We saw last week that helped Mike Evans have the outlier day. Wouldn't be shocking for me for Rashid Shaheed or one of those guys, or Olave, I guess, if they're going to give him a full run of snaps, actually get open downfield against Carolina more than it would be for Kamara to have an outlier day. David Montgomery, got to think they're going to lean on him a little bit more, but Khalil Herbert's back in the mix, so hard to say to what degree. The price tag doesn't look that great. I probably would not go David Montgomery's way. Khalil Herbert is at 4,600. You should probably play Khalil Herbert over David Montgomery relative to these two guys. Because Herbert, I think they still want to see what they have in him. It's certainly possible that Herbert's their go-to back moving forward. So Herbert would be more appealing to me than Montgomery, but both guys, it's Peterman at quarterback. So you're going to see a lot of 8-man boxes, a lot of those guys kind of compressed in, and that makes it a little bit tougher to really want to rely on any of these running backs for Chicago. Kenneth Walker, full go against the Rams. Rams not trying very hard. Rams not good recently because of Aaron Donald sitting out the year with him not really being hurt, but not really wanting to play either. I think Kenneth Walker's a pretty good play. He does project really well, though, so he's going to come up a lot for optimizer people. But where is he DVP-wise? Not a bad DVP matchup, so I don't think the casuals will get to him. Walker might be my favorite running back play we've talked about so far. Nice price tag on him. Motivations are there. The matchup is there. I think Walker's a really solid play. You know, certainly nobody's 100% play. Nobody's even a 50% play on week 18. But Walker, I feel like there's some motivation there. Closing the year strong. Maybe he can still win Offensive Rookie of the Year. I don't know that that's for sure a thing that he can get, but definitely seems like a possibility. Walker's probably a really strong play. Ezekiel Elliott, maybe. I mean, the Commanders are an okay run defense. It's a pretty good run defense. Zeke, motivation's questionable there. Wouldn't shock me to see more Malik Davis this week. I don't really trust Zeke that much, and I don't trust him having the ceiling that much, so I probably wouldn't go there. Cam Akers, we saw come back down to earth a little bit in terms of the fantasy production, but still got there yardage-wise. Does seem like they're basically using him to run out the clock on the year. Seattle, a team. Let me see. Where's Seattle on the year? Sorry, I have to change my search functions a little bit here. Because I have it on the formulas, which of course makes for terrible content. No, but now that people love seeing more than somebody change their find on Excel. Seattle on the year, positive EPA now, 0.004 EPA, which is like basically league average, but a little bit more on the positive side. Akers is going to get that volume. Certainly a guy that has shown an upside in tougher matchups, like the Broncos matchup was tougher. The Chargers matchup, probably a little bit tougher as well. So I think Cam Akers is a fine play. The tough part is like, I would not play Cam Akers and Kenneth Walker, but these are two guys that are going to get pretty assured volume. So I think prioritizing one or the other in a lot of lineups seems pretty good. Akers would look better to me in Geno stacks, but Akers is the guy that I would want to go to on the Rams side. If you are going to go to Geno and try to expect that there's going to be a competitive game where Geno actually has to hit a ceiling. Najee Harris talked about, pretty good matchup for him. The workload's been there. Man, you can make the case to play Najee this week. I don't love him. I don't think he's good, but I do think that, and I think Jaylen Warren is actively better. I'll say all those things out loud first. That said, this is a positive matchup. Cleveland is not good at defending the run, despite what we saw last week with Brian Robinson busting his chalk. The issue, though, is you are going to run into a lot of people playing Najee Harris this week because of that matchup, as we saw last week. And I talked about it on the stochastic shows. Like, I love the stochastic ownership projections. ETR, also great ownership projections as well. You can't account for the casuals and how they approach this stuff. And in particular, running backs, where every week they're targeting Houston, they're targeting Cleveland. That's what they keep doing week after week. So I think Najee Harris probably gets a little steam. You look at the box score, like, oh, you go 22 carries. Good matchup this week. So from that perspective, I think Najee gets steamed up. Wouldn't shock me to see him be 20% owned, with people knowing the Steelers have motivation. So something to keep in mind there, where Najee is probably the best play he's been at any point this year, but also he's probably going to be as high owned as he's ever been at any point this year. Mostert versus the Jets, I'm not buying it. Great game last week. Caught a lot of passes, which he hasn't done at all this year. Kind of weird there that he did move ahead of, that's weird that he moved ahead of Jeff Wilson overall in the pass catching game. I don't see it, though. I mean, I guess the desperation thing could lead him to get there a little bit more, which I think is why he had that upside last week, was just that, Teddy and then Skylar Thompson couldn't get the ball downfield. So they were just like, let's give it to Mostert and see what he can do. It's possible that happens again against the Jets. Let me see what the Jets defend under 20 yards. Jets on passes under 20 yards. They defend the short throws pretty well. 70% completion rate, which is actually low for throws under 20 yards. Only 2.7% TD rate. 5 intended air yards per attempt. So that does feel like they target the running back a good amount. Yeah. All right. I think Mostert's a little more of a live play than I'm probably giving him credit for. It does feel like one you kind of have to squint your eyes to get to, though. And I don't have the most confidence in Miami without two out there. Miami's been going the wrong way for weeks now. It's probably the case again. Iwi saying Najee and Walker are the two best running back plays. They are. The Najee one, though, I think is certainly not going to be a surprise to anybody. And I do think Cam Akers is pretty good leverage on Walker, but I think so far Najee, Walker, and Cam Akers stand out the most to me relative to these matchups and what's going on here in Week 18 relative to motivations. Tyler Algier keeps getting fed. I still don't think he has enough of a tournament ceiling to really want to get to, just because the offense isn't good enough yet. Algier, a guy you should be more worried about in 2023. I wouldn't force him in if he's coming up a lot in projections. Same thing for Brian Robinson here going against Dallas. Like, the touches are there, but he's not catching a lot of passes, and he doesn't have the touchdown equity to get there week after week. So I think Brian Robinson and Algier are kind of similar plays to me, where I'm excited for their future. Was excited to have exposure to them this year in best ball and all of that. But I think right now, DFS-wise, they're probably a little bit overvalued for people who want to just jam them in. He's going to get a chance to play them all year long. And then Damian Harris, let's talk about briefly. Did get 9 carries last week. Also got some targets, which is kind of surprising because it used to be Ramondre getting more of the targets in the pass game. Damian Harris is live, though. Like, I don't think he's not an objectively bad play. They are going to be motivated. Buffalo also sometimes does give up those long plays. They struggle in the second level yards, something that I've don't include in my normal Excel data poll, but did notice that for Football Outsiders this week, is that they've actually, I think, 26th in the league against second level runners. So basically when guys get through that line, they're able to break more plays. So Damian Harris, maybe a tournament play to get some volume to, but not one that I would certainly have more confidence in than Ramondre. And Zach Moss, he's going to get enough work here. I just think he's going to get steamed up because of the matchup against Houston. So Zach Moss is one of those guys I would actively watch out for. Don't mind him. He's a player who's got some amount of juice and clearly has the motivation from the team to see what he has after they traded for him in the season. But I don't know that he's an upside guy. I don't know that I have a ton of confidence in going there, especially if the field's going to own him heavy. Zach Moss, I think, is a 10 to 20% owned guy, maybe a little bit higher if the projection system starts to give him a little bit of a boost throughout the week. Bam Knight, dismal. I thought this game against Seattle was his shot to get right. He did not get right. On paper, he looks good. Just the workload's not there enough. Is Michael Carter doing anything useful? I don't think so. Michael Carter, even less useful. I wouldn't play Jets running backs this week. I just think that's probably not worth your time. And I think that covers it. I do think, though, that there is going to be somebody throughout the course of this week who's down here who ends up coming up meaningfully, whether it is the Jerome Ford, whether it is one of these other guys. Somebody's going to come up here, and I think you need to really watch inactives. Obviously, we'll talk about it here on this channel. A lot of the other great channels out there, the Stochastics, the ETRs of the world, Underdog, they'll all talk about the stuff throughout the course of the week. But rookies do get a lot of burn at this point of the year. So do just second string guys, third string guys. And sometimes they do have that outlier day because they're going against defenses that aren't properly motivated. So I would watch all the news this week. I will certainly do the best I can to keep an eye on it as well and talk to you guys about that. But I think there's going to be one of these running backs, 4K to 5K, who wins the tournament this week. That'd be my personal bet. And it's one that I'm, it's just how it goes every single year. Wide receiver, Justin Jefferson is playing for something here. It's just, man, it's hard to trust him after this game here. Like, I did not expect that. I even went on Stochastic. It was like, there was some guy in chat who's being a fucking douchebag, as happens on YouTube sometimes, not in our chat, thankfully. Another chat's out there. And he was like, oh, the Packers are so much better than the Vikings. And I was like, first of all, they're not. Like, the Vikings are absolutely overrated. The Packers aren't a good team. If they can do this to Justin Jefferson, I don't know. I think it was more what they did to Kirk Cousins that affected Justin Jefferson, but it certainly looks bad here. That said, he's now, I think 240 yards away from 2,000 yards. So maybe they'll give him a shot. Maybe they'll give him some deep plays and see if he can get there, because that was something that was important to him coming in. Jefferson is a tournament play you can get to. I wouldn't play a lot of them at 9,100, but when everybody's going to be so down on him, like he legit killed 50% of DraftKings teams last week. He killed 40% of Best Ball Mania teams last week. People are not going to want to play Justin Jefferson this week. And if he does go for the record, that's kind of meaningless right now. I think that's something that they could do as a get right spot. So it wouldn't shock me to see him an outlier day. From that perspective, I would play him. Tyreek, kind of a no-go. Jamar Chase, maybe interesting. Same thing for T. Higgins. Again, Baltimore struggles pretty bad downfield. That's something that could open things up for Chase or Higgins, or I suppose Tyler Boyd, any of those guys really. But Chase certainly hasn't had the outlier day in a while. Haven't seen him break a game over 20 fantasy points, only one within the last 4 weeks. So that's something where I think we know what the ceiling is. We know the upside's there. That said, it's going to be a more crowded pass catching core. Hayden Hurst back in, all of that. And Hurst was heavily involved in that beginning part of that Monday night game. So certainly possible that does kind of bring Chase's ceiling down a little bit, but we know he can still beat any coverage and still do whatever he wants if they do throw him the ball. CeeDee Lamb. I haven't played a lot of CeeDee Lamb in DFS this year, and I don't really see that changing here. I guess the motivations do look pretty favorable for him, but it's all moving parts. So I think that comes with some risk profile overall. Oh, the porn bots are back. Welcome back, porn bots. I forgot to put in subscribers only, so that's on me. Sorry, sexchat69.site. Hit the bricks. T. Higgins, same thing as Jamar Chase. We know the deal with him. Great player. Great best ball player. Mike Evans is a nope. I hope people play him this week. I don't think he'll come anywhere close to what he's doing. I don't think the Bucs will actually try that hard. Mike Evans be a non-starter to me. I think wide receiver is honestly a lot like running back, where somebody here is going, yeah, that's so rude. The Sex Box don't subscribe to the channel. They just come in here and hawk their wares. Support the channel. Hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, all that sex bots. Don't just come into chat expecting me to go to sexchat69.site. You got to earn it. You got to earn it with community involvement. Chris Olave, I've talked about, solid play. I think kind of the same thing as Mike Evans. Rashid Shaheed seems a little bit safer. Like, you can make the case Rashid Shaheed has been better than Chris Olave week to week over the last month or so. Fantasy-wise, he certainly has been. Target-wise, he has been. I would, honestly, Rashid Shaheed might be the week 18 guy you need in DFS. I wouldn't, put my whole ass on that one. I wouldn't, spend my entire bankroll on this one. But I think Rashid Shaheed is live to have some big plays. Just what we talked about with Carolina. They're going to blitz. They're going to try to get guys home and not get guys home. Andy Dalton can sit in some cushy pockets and get a ball downfield. It's certainly Olave to be more of a tournament play, but it's not like Rashid Shaheed's going to be very highly owned. I think Rashid Shaheed's kind of interesting to go to at that cheap of a price tag for how good he's been the last month. Anybody else here? Jerry Jeudy came back down to earth last week. Waiting motivations overall. I don't know about Jeudy. Oof. It is hard on week 18, guys. It is, so please hit that like button. It's hard on week 18. You're seeing me, like the hamster wheels in my head spinning right now, trying to make this work. But God, it is really atrocious. Yeah, Shaheed is really the one guy that stands out to me here. Like, is there anybody else who's a young guy that we haven't seen a lot of who could have some juice? It's a gross week. It is unequivocally a gross week. Fuck. Maybe Khalil Shakir? Does he get in the mix more? He's already been running a good amount of routes. But Buffalo's playing for something, so he probably doesn't matter. There's got to be a young guy that I'm not thinking of right now. I'm going to rack my brain over this, and I'll come back with some hot takes on Friday when I'm back with Pete. But I think there's got to be somebody here who's going to jump up. And this is where you guys need to strap in for the fact that, this is why it's so important to me to comb through these 3K guys, these 4K guys, and all of that. because this is the time when these guys really matter and salary also like doesn't matter. Like you could see a $48,000 team win it all this week just because all it takes is one of those 3K guys and then some other mix of guys who are decently projected to get there. Tyquan Thornton. I mean, he kind of got there last week. Tough matchup against Buffalo, though, to expect the ceiling. And he's also one of the young guys people like a lot. So I don't know that I would necessarily force that way, but he's definitely in the mix as like a cheap guy who could get there and have a ceiling. And just be mindful of these guys as they kind of go through the week. I don't think Stochastic has anybody. Let me just see real fast if they made jumping out value-wise. They have Stidham as being a good value on Saturday. Oh, they fucking love Pickett this week, which did not put the joy in my heart for sure. Brandon Powell for the Rams, but no, you're not going to trust him with Baker Mayfield throwing the ball. Brandon Powell does seem like somebody, though, who's gotten enough work and maybe gets a little bit more. Tutu, I guess, would be the same thing. The Tutu's been overprojected for weeks. Quan Treadwell. No, because Seattle's playing. They're playing to make the playoffs, so I don't think it would be Treadwell. Van Jefferson's kind of been shunted down the rotation. Yeah, I don't know. There's really nobody who stands out meaningfully, but I think the Rams receivers overall, yeah. Willie, you're right. Any Rams receiver is a dart throw at this point, so keep that in mind. Tight end on Sunday. We're going to talk about Saturday in a second here. I know we kind of spent a little bit more time on this than I normally would like here, but it's hard. It's hard. I'm doing the best I can to walk through this and kind of give you some takes, but man, it's just hard to know until you really know that this team's pulling starters. This team has been playing this guy in practice all week who hasn't played at all this year. It's really hard to kind of dig in meaningfully. Kittle gets a good matchup, but if Debo's back, it does kind of hurt him a little bit. Kittle, though, I don't mind because he did come down enough in week 17 that people probably are thrown off the scent. 6K price tag's a little bit tough, but you should have enough salary to go around, especially if one of these guys who are cheap bubbles up. So Kittle's a pretty solid play here. Hockenson against Chicago, also a fine play. Though I really do think if anybody's going to have an outlier day here, it's either Jefferson or Dalvin Cook. So I probably would not go Hockenson's way because I think if anything gets thrown through the air from Minnesota, you got to think they're going to go to Jefferson, or Jefferson's not going to be happy because he wants the shot to break that record and also the shot to hit 2K receiving yards. So Hockenson will come down a little bit to me. DeAndre Carter has some incentives, maybe a dart throw there. The incentives, I have to dig in a little bit more and see what's out there over the course of the week. But sometimes the incentives are like, oh, the guy has to catch 3 passes and they feed him like 3 screens and that's it. And it ends up not being enough where it's like if it's a 100-yard incentive and it's a guy who's a star, those end up being a little bit more meaningful, but definitely something to watch throughout the week. And also, I will watch on our behalf and give you guys the best takes I can. Trey McBride, we should probably talk about a little bit here just because of the fact that he was targeted pretty heavily by David Blau. Again, the same thing I talk about a lot with backup QBs. Backup QBs, for the most part, who haven't had an established track record of success, like a Nick Foles or whatever, like it throwing the ball downfield successfully, they do target those inside guys. They do target the tight end more. So you could see Blau get targeted against the Niners. That said, do you want to trust him against that linebacker core in a game that does matter for him? I would have a hard time with it, but this guy was an award winner in college. He has a good pedigree. Those are the guys to really look at. Like McBride last week did end up making some sense. This week makes sense again, but besides the matchup against San Francisco. So certainly a guy you can get to and have some hope in. Jordan Akins, he didn't do anything last week. What happened to Brevin Jordan? Brevin Jordan, one of the big busts of the year, honestly. Like he looks like a star player and he just is not. He just is not. All right. Defenses, I'm not even going to dare try. I guess let's see. Who's a team that has no motivation at all that sucks? I mean, the Niners D obviously looks good against Blau. The Vikings at 2,900, I would think against Peterman could have some appeal overall. I probably will jam some Vikings D in there, though I think they'll probably project well. They've been bad all year, but I think it might not matter against Peterman and just a Bears team that's going the wrong way at this time of year. So that's some upside there. The Cowboys going against Howell have upside, but they're priced up. I don't think anybody's got a meaningfully better matchup than they had coming in for the most part, unless unless the Niners can't do anything and they're pulling their starters, then maybe the Cardinals D gets a little bit of appeal, but take whatever you get in defense, I think, and feel good with it. So basically the same as any week here. That's the one consistent thing we have there. All right, Saturday slate. Let's get into that one real fast, and I'll show you guys where I have the optimal lineups as well, so we can talk about that. So the Saturday slate, this honestly, fuck it. Hold on. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit too much. I'm just going to share my whole screen here because I think this will be easier to move back and forth. So I'm going to show you guys the optimal lineups for the Saturday slate. Here's a Sunday one too, by the way. This is the top 25 projected lineups according to Stochastic. You've seen a lot of McCaffrey, a lot of Tyler Algiers. It talks about I don't love Algier. Good amount of Kenneth Walker, so he will be a well-projected play that comes up a good amount. Team stacks, nobody really jumping out meaningfully. The Saturday slate, though, is a different ball game. People are going to be really jamming Chiefs in on Saturday. You can see what is this? So this is basically every lineup, or 22 out of 25 lineups have at least 4 Chiefs. Every single lineup has at least 2 Chiefs. And then, 24 out of 25, the top projected lineups have at least 3 Chiefs. So I would say right away, I would make a rule to have max 3 Chiefs. And that's for a 2-game slate. That's how you approach it, like a showdown. Definitely a player that overall, did I say Brevin Knight? I love Brevin Knight as a basketball player too. Brevin Jordan. Sorry if I said the wrong Brevin. Too many key Brevins in my life. But yes, this Chiefs team is going to be owned out the ass. So I would be mindful of that. Who are the 100% guys that are coming up from the Chiefs? Kelsey coming up in every lineup. Mahomes not coming up in every lineup, but Juju coming up in nearly every lineup. Travis Etienne coming up in every lineup. So right away, as I talk about the showdown stuff, I would make a rule perhaps to separate Kelsey and Etienne, or at least to do what I was saying and play max 3 Chiefs. 2-game slates are going to be a lot of similar things to what we talked about all showdown season long. It's not about building the best projected lineups. It's not about building the best lineups. It's about building lineups that nobody else is building on. So this take here, Titan stack on Saturday for the win, I would agree that's kind of interesting. Okay, good. I'm glad I said the right Brevin. Because honestly, as we get older and as you're a content creator, it's like we all feel the Bill Simmons seeping in where it's like, fuck, am I just saying the wrong name while talking for an hour straight on a stream? It's entirely possible. So thank you for telling me I'm not going completely insane, Willie. I appreciate it. Yeah, so Josh Dobbs wasn't good in his start. Let me pull up some Josh Dobbs stats because I was looking at him before the show. That's kind of sicko I am digging into Josh Dobbs stats. He was a negative DVOA player in his debut here for the Titans, negative 13%. Also had a negative CPOE, which is a completion percentage plus the over expectation plus the EPA. That was at minus 0.03, it looks like. So he was not good in his debut. That said, this matchup against the Jags is pretty soft, and Dobbs, I think, is good enough, and he probably can run more than he showed in his debut as well. So I think Titan stacks are a good play, or, not a good play, a better play in the field will treat them as. Low total for Tennessee, 17 implied points compared to 23.3 implied points for Jacksonville. But the fact that Dobbs is the only quarterback who doesn't come up at all here, I'm going to play some Josh Dobbs on Saturday. I can promise you that much. If you want to go down on the Josh Dobbs ship with me and Willie here, then you can do that. For the most part, I think that, single stacks of Titans would be good, but really just anything that gets you away from this morass of Chiefs is the main thing here. Because if Jarrett Stidham is as good as he was last week, maybe they could put up a fight here and maybe the Chiefs then have multiple guys who can get there, but you could easily see a concentration of targets. There's no way to me that a Mahomes, ATN, Pacheco, Treylon Burks, Juju, Marquez, Valdes-Scantling, Kelsey, you're not hitting on a Mahomes triple stack plus Pacheco. That's never going to happen. But people will play that because that's what people try to think is they start to overstack. The Thanksgiving slate was the best example of that, where I went on every piece of content I did and said, play less Bills in the field because that's the one difference point you can have. Playing less Chiefs on the Saturday slate is the exact same thing. And I get it. They're the best team. They're going against a Raiders team that's terrible against the pass, gives up a lot of production across the board. But if you try to concentrate that production on 2 or 3 guys, if you don't play Mahomes and then really target, let's say Pacheco has an outlier day or McKinnon has an outlier day, and then Kelsey has an outlier day, you could definitely see Juju fail. You could see MVS fail. MVS is dying to fail. You could look at the game log here. He's begging you to not play him, and people are going to play him pretty heavy. So I would certainly say for this week, just play 3 or less Chiefs and feel pretty good about getting away from large portions of the field. Besides that, how does Stidham lineups look? Stidham, man, I don't know if I'm getting Gardner Minshew here, where he was really good in his first game and then he's going to be terrible moving forward. But Stidham did look kind of good numerically based on the, some of the counting stats, certainly. Some of the advanced stats, a little bit less good. But he did have a 75% adjusted completion rate, and also was really getting the ball downfield, 9.4 intended air yards per attempt, 5 deep throws to 20 plus yards, 50% completion rate on those deep passes. Did have 4% interception rate, a little bit under that. So that's certainly something that could get worse. But I think Stidham is alive to keep them in this game. So that's one way to get different and still kind of capture what the Chiefs are doing is you load up on Raiders, you do a Raiders stack, you do your bringbacks to the Chiefs. I would say that's honestly a more logical play than going to Josh Dobbs, even though I will play Josh Dobbs this week. I think Stidham with the team total being there with him actually looking pretty good and maybe like he is going to be the Josh McDaniels golden goose moving forward. I'm pretty intrigued by it. Is it a must to have at least one of Jacobs and Devontae this week? I would say no because of the motivations for the Raiders, of which there are none. So it's something where you could see Stidham throw into Mac Hollins, throw into is there even a fourth string? No, there's nobody young on the in the Raiders repertoire who's going to be boiling out there. It's a risk. I think that I like Adams. Adams is going to project really well, though. You could see that he's coming up in a lot of these lineups. Actually, no. Adams only in 16% of lineups. Yeah. It's hard, man. Because like if you're Josh Jacobs, if I were Josh Jacobs, I personally would just be like, I'm done for the year. Like I made my contract. Like, I'm good for the year. I don't need to play this meaningless game that you guys are putting me out there for. And I think he's one guy too, where there really is a young guy behind him with Zamir White. So I'd be more inclined to play Adams over Jacobs if I had to choose between the two, because I think that Jacobs has a logical guy that they want to see more of just to know where they stand going into next year. And they've liked Zamir White enough to bump him up the rotation to cut Kenyon Drake. So I think this is a slate where you can play Zamir White and that's your way to get different. And that wouldn't be crazy to me. But I would have real concern about Josh Jacobs just because he's been banged up. Like why is he playing if I were Josh Jacobs? You got to think sometimes, like, relative to these guys' offseason motivations, like he doesn't have any contractual things that I'm aware of that in terms of like a motivator that he's going to get more money for. But Adams, I think, is probably a little more motivated to go and just see what they have. And also they just have nobody else to put in lieu of him. So I think Adams would be the better play over Jacobs. Tight end here. Yeah, you're just getting Kelsey everywhere. So if you play, is Waller even a thing? Is Waller playing this week? Oh, I'm on the Sunday slate shit. Waller is another guy that barely has wanted to play this year, so maybe there's something I'm missing with Waller. No, they have him in a projection. Yeah, Waller is in play, I guess. Anyway, I would just, in summation, I would say the pass catcher's more in play than the running backs, just because there's an obvious young guy that they can go to and see what they have there. Jacobs free agent, so it makes sense to see what they have in Zamir. Yeah, I think this is one take that I feel pretty good about. And Zamir White's just one of those young guys that does stand out as like, oh, he's really gotten no chances this year. And like, what if he is Josh Jacobs? Like, we don't know that. Numerically, he's been pretty close to Josh Jacobs in terms of his production on the year. I can actually pull that up because that's something that I was tracking a couple weeks ago, and I'm curious if it still holds up. Josh Jacobs. Sorry, I know pulling up data is not the most exciting part here. So Jacobs on the year. Where's his avoided tackle rate? So his avoided tackle rate's 27%. Yards after contact is 3.5. I think Zamir White's, if I'm remembering correctly, are pretty close to that as well. Zamir White, a lower avoided tackle rate, but also 3.3 yards after contact, so that's a good number. Only a 12.5% avoided tackle rate, but it's really low sample size stuff for Zamir White. But it doesn't really matter, though. Like, his skill level doesn't matter. I think he can be like 80% of like what Josh Jacobs is in this offense if they give him the volume, if they have the same line and all that stuff. So I think Zamir White's a really strong play for Saturday, a player that will probably not prop up in projection systems. But, like, don't play 50% Zamir White, but just be mindful of that, especially if you're getting a lot of Josh Jacobs in your lineups, that there is like a live young pivot that they probably do have some motivation to want to see out there. Besides that, no Christian Kirk coming up in the top 25. So I think he's a tournament play, especially given just how much Travis Etienne and how much Evan Ingram coming up. We're getting Travis Etienne in 100% of lineups. We're getting Ingram in 60% of lineups. So Christian Kirk would be the natural lever there. But again, the Jaguars are playing for all the marbles here. They win and they're in. So they're going full go here. No young guys should be getting a run here. It should just be the core players. Same thing for the Titans. Treylon Burks, about as safe as you can get relative to Treylon Burks. Did seem like Josh Dobbs favored Robert Woods a little bit more, but Burks got enough work where I think those guys are pretty much one-to-one plays. I certainly would try to prioritize those guys in the slate just because their game does matter the most. The motivations are going to be crystal clear, whereas the Raiders, we have question marks. The Chiefs might not have to do everything to get there. Loading up, game stacking. the Titans Jags game, I think is an approach that'll probably be underplayed. That's because people are going to be so excited to play a bunch of Chiefs in the high team total going against a Raiders defense that doesn't defend the pass well. And that's the kind of play that, to me, I think you can sort of get away from and try to actually target a game that matters and try to game stack it. So that's my read on the Saturday slate. We don't need to actually go on the DK portion of things. All right, so tomorrow, I'm actually not sure what I'm going to do tomorrow. I think the data video, because of what we talked about here, I don't really want to sit down and produce and edit the data video. So I might just hammer some playoff best ball drafts on the channel tomorrow, but there will be content coming out on Splash Play tomorrow. So please, guys, make sure to hit that like button. Of course, subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below if you're watching after the fact. I always reply to comments too. So if you have any questions about if you have a weird team that's going into week 18 for some reason, feel free to ask me some either ors or whatever. But really just appreciate the support here as we gear up for the playoffs where the content on Splash Play doesn't stop. The betting and fantasy doesn't stop here. So if you're new to Splash Play, strap in, enjoy the show, enjoy the ruminations and the fucking hand wringing over what's going to be a weird few weeks of football, especially depending on how that Bills-Bengals games go. But I appreciate all of you guys for hanging out with me. Thanks for taking the time. And I'm going to hit the outro here, but I'll be back with you guys tomorrow. So let me close this GIF out and then hit the button. And I will see you guys again very soon.